It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and Sisko's got a visitor. A face with some lines is a chance to spin the wheel of names, so let's find out what we're going to be calling today's guest. Pfft East 55 by Commander British Cynic. Pfft East 55 is the captain of a ship docked at the station for repairs and, based on his behaviour, also a complete and utter cockwomble. He's short with Sisko to the point of rudeness and flat-out insulting about humans. Sisko suggests he should piss off to a Vulcan starbase if he'd prefer, an offer that's declined. Besides, he says he wants to stay here so he can use a HOLOSUITE. His crew have been playing a game together and he's eager to resume. A human game, in fact. Captain East 55 leaves shortly after and Sisko tells Kira to summon the senior staff. Long story short, Pfft East 55 has challenged Sisko to a game of baseball with his all-Vulcan crew, so Sisko's roping everybody in to play. That most of them have no clue about it is a mere technicality. Learning the rules of the game seems like a good start, even if it does mean none of them are doing their actual bloody jobs. Perhaps the not doing your jobs bit is what prompts Lita and Rom, the underappreciated brother, to apply for the team. Rom's heard Sisko uses baseball as a way to spend time with Jake, and he wants to do the same with Eggnog. Quark's quick with the mockery until Lita turns it back towards him. That's enough for Quark to ask when the tryouts are, which is odd when they're being held in one of his HOLOSUITEs, but let's ignore that for now. The good news is everybody gives it their best during the first practice session. The bad news is the best for a lot of them is complete dogshit. Sisko doesn't care. He plans to win regardless of what he has to work with. Despite this, he still wants it to be a fair game. That's why he's asking Odo to be the umpire. Here's hoping that position comes with fewer risks than playing, as a fair portion of the team now require medical treatment. Most can be fixed, but O'Brien's buggered up his dodgy shoulder again, so he's out for the duration. Sisko enlists him to coach instead, which is a bold choice for somebody who doesn't know the game. O'Brien's departure leaves a gap on the team, but Sisko's had an idea for who to bring in. Cassidy Yates is greeted at the airlock by Sisko bearing flowers. By a fascinating series of coincidences, her next few cargo jobs have all been given to other ships at short notice, meaning she's got a couple of weeks downtime. At least she both knows and likes baseball, so being press-ganged into playing isn't a complete loss. The same cannot be said of all Sisko's players, and as Captain Pfft East 55 calls by the HOLOSUITE to check out the competition, Rom, the underappreciated brother, makes a complete and utter ass of himself. This performance, coupled with him being responsible for at least 2 of the injuries earlier, prompts Sisko to throw him off the team in a manner that could not be described as diplomatic. Rom's clearly upset by the decision, and Sisko's handling of it has resulted in everybody but Worf deciding they'll quit as well. Rom talks them out of it, saying the rest of them are good and he wants them to win, so they decide to continue. Perhaps part of that is because they're all starting to get into it now, according to the montage we get. Even Odo's practicing some umpire shit. The montage takes the rest of the 2 weeks, apparently, because it's now the night before the game and Cassidy's with Sisko. She knows him well enough to have deduced this isn't simply a game, and gets the truth out of him eventually. Back in the academy, Pfft East 55 and Sisko got into a little disagreement about how humans and any other species who have to deal with emotions are shite. Sisko, having been completely wankered at the time because this was in a bar, decided a wrestling match was the best way to solve the matter. Obviously, Sisko got his ass handed to him, and likely would have done if sober too, which Sisko reckons he earned. What he didn't earn was Pfft East 55 being a complete dick about it for years afterwards, up to and including publishing multiple papers about how the wrestling match proved Vulcans are the best. Arriving on DS9 and casually saying he just so happens to be playing baseball now is clearly not a coincidence, and if it was to provoke another confrontation, it worked. Baseball is close to Sisko's heart, which is why he so wants to beat the cocky little bastard. Despite Cassidy thinking this information will motivate the others, he makes her promise not to mention it. The story is for her alone. Cassidy's breaking her promise and sharing what Sisko told her with the rest of the team. As she predicted, this makes them all want to win more, not least of which to defend the honor of non-Vulcans. To the game we go. Even Rom, the underappreciated brother, is there, though only as a member of the crowd. It becomes a crowd of one when Sisko wants them deleted, his players having never experienced an audience before. That the lack of so many extras also makes filming significantly easier is just a coincidence. Everything's going swimmingly right up until the game actually starts, at which point Jake's first pitch is knocked out of the park. It goes downhill from there, and with each new innings, the score of the away team goes up, while ours stays a solid 0. 4-4 East 5-5's team aren't particularly interested in being civil either, with one player deliberately knocking Kira on her ass. It may even have been to provoke her into getting herself thrown out, Sisko intervening before things escalate. Sadly, Sisko doesn't follow his own advice, and when Odo calls a strike that both Worf and he disagree with, he gets thrown off the field for physical contact with the umpire. This is a comedy relief episode though, so it can't all be misery. A Vulcan player technically fails to complete his run by neglecting to touch home base when he returns, something O'Brien realizes when Odo's very conspicuous about not advancing the game afterwards. Cue Eggnog running to the away team dugout and trying to tag each player, then tossing the ball to Jake when the player in question tries to leg it and is subsequently tagged out. The shenanigans put Sisko in a much better mood, and possibly a thoughtful one too, when he starts talking to Rom in the stands. The pair leave together while our side switches to batting. It's a little later, and we're doing so well that not only are we sometimes hitting the ball, but we actually have a player reaching bases now as well. Sisko appears in the stands again and tells O'Brien to call a timeout. He wants to put a new player into the game. Quark's not sold on the idea of Rom batting next, as we have a genuine chance of scoring, but the others are behind him. So too is the holographic crowd that Sisko summons back. A couple of strikes later, and O'Brien decides actually hitting the ball properly might be asking too much, so tells Rom to just put his bat in the way instead. Rom doesn't hear, but lucks his way into accidentally bunting anyway. Eggnog scores, and our team runs onto the field to congratulate both of them on proving we're only 90% incompetent, as long as you're willing to include luck. 4-4 East 5-5 takes issue with this display and complains to Odo. When Odo ignores him, 4-4 East 5-5 physically turns him back and is subsequently thrown out of the game for contact with the umpire. We're in Quarks and celebrating our stylish loss. Sisko apologizes to Rom for being a dick, and 4-4 East 5-5 arrives to try and stick his oar in. Sisko did lose after all. Sisko doesn't care and buys a round of drinks to much celebration, which only provokes 4-4 East 5-5 further. So much so that everybody starts to say he's sounding a touch emotional. Being asked if he'd like to join Sisko's team in signing the baseball, and receiving laughter as a result, is sufficient for him to bugger off, so we'll leave Sisko to revel in his successful failure until the next adventure. With 3 serious episodes back-to-back at the start of the final season, all of them dealing with pretty heavy stuff, it's not particularly surprising that we dip into the comedy relief a little earlier than usual. For those of you who are curious, we tend to wait until episode 6 onwards for the first humour story, though season 3 is an outlier with the House of Quark at episode 3. Does any of that matter? Not really, but I've got the sort of brain that sees patterns in things even if they weren't intentional, and I thought it was interesting enough to share. Anywho, the comedy episode then. A tiny snippet of Sisko as a cadet, a rivalry with another, and a whole lot of sports ball. As somebody who cares very little for the latter of those, I'm perhaps not the target audience for this one, though I do wonder quite how much of an overlap the Star Trek and sports Venn diagram has in general. I may not give a rat's ring piece about the story itself, but there are still a goodly few things to pull apart and study in more detail, so let's do that instead. First off, then, is the behaviour of our guest captain this episode. 4-4 East 5-5 is, bluntly, racist. To consider entire groups of people inferior purely because of their origin is the very literal definition of the term, and that opens up a number of questions. Firstly, how's this guy even in Starfleet, let alone in command of a ship? The stated purpose of Starfleet is peaceful exploration and coexistence, the scientific arm of a federation comprising multiple species. Anybody stating an open bias to species, even towards someone against whom they have a personal dislike, is at odds with the very principles they've sworn to uphold. Secondly, how's this guy wearing an IDIC symbol? IDIC, or IDIC, stands for Infinite Diversity in Infinite Combinations, and is a Vulcan philosophy embracing differences. The core belief of that philosophy is that all distinctiveness has its own value. The answer to both of those questions, of course, is that the episode needed an asshole. The braggadocious arrogance he displays may have been more suited to the stereotype of Romulans or Klingons, but they're not an option for a Starfleet ship. Thus, we get a Vulcan dickhead because it's narratively necessary. Putting to one side the fact that all of the above makes him wholly unsuited to the job, his attitude does touch on a very curious Vulcan topic. 454 East 55 is ostensibly a man of emotionless logic. That's not particularly surprising, as it's the defining characteristic of Vulcans. What makes it more interesting is that his behavior does not support this, and by extension highlights a contradiction in thinking for some Vulcans. There are those so invested in the practice of logic over emotions that they are, ironically, offended by those with emotions. If you've been with us for a while, you may remember this is something we've briefly touched on before. In the episode Rise from Season 3 of Voyager, we mentioned the disconnect between Tuvok's appreciation of logical purity and his disdain for Neelix's emotional behavior. The purely logical viewpoint would be to see the value in any situation without personal judgment, but some Vulcans are so entrenched in the worship of logic that their reverence actually runs counter to the pursuit of that goal. It is, in essence, religion rather than philosophy to some Vulcans, and that creates a situation where anything contrary to logic is not merely different, but blasphemous. Indeed, this also goes some way to answering the IDIC symbol question, as giving it religious overtones makes it comparable to situations in our own world. I'm sure plenty of you know people who wear a crucifix while ignoring the reported words of the guy who got nailed to it. The whole thing is a fascinating aspect of the Vulcan psyche, and seeing a man who claims to live and breathe logic act so utterly at odds with it is another reminder that there's more to the Vulcans than just space nerds. A couple of other bits then before we're done. The first is a line from Dax that has implications for Earth. She says the third Dax host, Emily, was an Olympic gymnast. That suggests the Olympic Games are still held until at least the 23rd century, and now open to alien species as well. The last topic for today is a lesson on the perils of location filming. During the baseball game at the end of the episode, we see shadows cast by the sun move all over the place. It's something I might have missed had there not been several shots with large shadows covering the home base. The game was filmed at Loyola Marymount University, Los Angeles, presumably in the Page Baseball Stadium, based on the seating and what looks like the Gersten Pavilion in the background. I'm assuming the shadows on home base are cast by the tall trees on the east border of the field. The thing is, those shadows would only be cast to the west in the morning as the sun's rising, which means the shot of the first Vulcan player hitting his home run was filmed earlier in the day than the shots of that same player just seconds afterwards. You'll note his shadow is now slightly northeast. To be clear, filming shots out of order is standard procedure for logistical reasons. It's also possible they actually were filmed in order, but just over multiple days. That would also account for why Kira's shirt says Nerys in some shots and Kira in others. I'm guessing someone from wardrobe didn't know which would be used, and possibly because of Bajoran naming conventions being reversed, so made both, and then they got mixed up between days. On the plus side, this particular example of the environment accidentally screwing a location shoot might have an in-universe explanation. We know the planet Vulcan resides in a system with 3 stars, so we could headcanon this bit of celestial oddness as perfectly normal if this is 454 East 55's program. As for the audience being entirely human, well, I don't have any trouble imagining such an arsehole wanting his victories to be observed by his lessers. End of episode.
Well, I didn't know it were gonna be on dodgy side, did I?
On the dodgy side? It made the GeoCity look like a civilized oasis in comparison.
Alright, I'll admit I could have done without the ghost stepping, or the guy telling me it was just a Roman walk.
I suppose having all the assholes in one place makes it easier to dodge them. Now all we have to do is avoid a repeat with somewhere similar.
Come on then, big brain, how are we supposed to research which social media to go to?
Actually, I've been giving it some thought.
Of course you have, that's how these work.
And I think the answer might be the search engine.
That's what took us to bloody dumpster fire.
Yes, but that's because you asked for the most famous social media. All it did was give you what you asked for.
So you're saying the real trick is...
knowing what question to ask. Exactly.
Oh, an electronic genie, that's just what we bloody need. Woof.